even for my other fellow Top Chef family members that aren't from Los Angeles, I felt that they got a very rich understanding of LA after our Top Chef experience.
So which one of you said you would never do this again?
It is good to be back. 15 chefs have returned, the fiercest this competition has ever seen.
It's like they never left.
Melissa, you are Top Chef.
I grew up in Hacienda Heights. I went through high school there, but it was, basically the parts of East LA that my family and I are from are very Chinese populated and sort of these Chinese suburbs. But I remember being exposed to so many different flavors within the Chinese realm of cooking, things that I didn't necessarily grow up on because my mother's from Hong Kong, my father's from Shanghai. But there was like Chengdu food and Sichuan and Beijing food, and just you can find it all in LA. And I think that's what I love about LA, and that's the part of me. That's the part that's still with me as a chef. Is all that the authenticity of these just rich flavors and the diversity of culture, I think, is what I really also enjoy about Los Angeles. It's like no other city, at least from a culinary perspective.
So I prepared a lobster wonton with a shellfish consomme, and it has a charred allium oil and some beautiful vegetables.
To me, Melissa's was pretty close to perfection.
It's a Michelin-style dish, for sure.
Wow.
I will put it in my restaurant.
I come up to San Francisco and I feel the food here can be a little more hybrided and you kind of lose a little bit of that authenticity. But LA is like, if you want the best Korean barbecue, like you go to K-Town and like you'll get it. And you want the best Mexican food, you go to East LA. Like it's very pocketed, but in such a beautiful way. You can really feel very immersed in someone else's culture by like just visiting a neighborhood of LA because they are so different from one another. So I always tell people, if you're gonna visit LA, like drive around, go everywhere because it's a big city and oftentimes it's easy to just like go to Santa Monica and like stay in Santa Monica. But like, what about, I don't know, like a Highland Park and just all these other parts. Yeah, I always tell people like spend longer than a few days in LA and get a car. Like driving to each beach is like so different. Malibu to Manhattan to Marina del Rey, Santa Monica. You just drive all down the whole coast. It's like every beach is very different from one another. And the feeling that you get when you're in those areas. I remember just really fighting hard for East LA to be like showcased on the show. I remember fighting for East LA because I was like, this needs to be highlighted. Whether or not I go or whether or not Karen or Nini goes, like I was like, someone needs to go to East LA to show this neighborhood because this is, to me, where I grew up. And it's also a place that was so rich in flavor and people don't necessarily know about on the West Side. And I wanted that to kind of like come together somehow.
This here is Alhambra. This is where I grew up. This area is known for a lot of Chinese cafes. The whole neighborhood smells like chilies and hot sauce. That's where my mom and my stepdad are. Melissa's mom.
Every time I fly home, I always eat locally because I just miss Chinese food, and it's not the same as San Francisco, especially the authenticity of what you can get in Los Angeles. So I often go to Lunasia for my dim sum. There's another place called King Wah, and those are kind of my two favorite dim sum spots that I go to with my parents and just had been going to for years. I go with my grandmother when she was alive. So there's just so many memories of just going to these like dim sum spots on Saturdays with grandma and family members. I love Cato in Los Angeles. That is my favorite restaurant. It's a dear friend of mine, John Yao. He's also an extremely talented chef. He's Michelin star rated. He's doing very, to me, progressive food and really bringing in a lot of his own culture as a Taiwanese American. And so he's really kind of modernized that and shown that Chinese food and Taiwanese food isn't just greasy takeout. It can be very elevated. And so I'm looking forward to going there, you know, once things kind of go back to normal, and enjoying the whole tasting menu experience, because he certainly spoils me when I'm there. I've lived in San Francisco for so many years as an adult chef, and just building my career up here, that I got to explore Los Angeles as a chef, as a professional chef that has this sort of career that I've built so far. And I felt it was all new to me, you know, exploring LA than the way that LA was when I grew up there. And my parents have an office right across the street from Chengdu Taste. And I had never gone to eat there because there's always just like so many people, crazy line out the door. You wait for like 2 hours to get a seat. But that happened because of Jonathan Gold. He really just put this restaurant on the map, and talked about it, and which is so fantastic that he was supporting so many immigrant communities and restaurants that you know, most of the mainstream world don't get to hear about. So yeah, I had never eaten there until Top Chef. But I remember thinking, like, my parents are right there. Can I like go say hi? Just like right across the street. But the food was fantastic, very spicy. And also, you know, these flavors that I didn't necessarily grow up on, as far as my home cooking, but you know, just it was so rich, and like a lot of that Szechuan chili pepper flavor that just like numbs your mouth. So I highly recommend people go there after quarantine. I mean, I thought it was so much fun to start off the season and just jump into our first challenge, cooking on the beach. I remember doing bonfires, you know, in high school, and going to the beach, roasting marshmallows and like hot dogs on sticks. But this was a whole nother experience to be able to go to San Pedro and like, you know, cook this sort of fancy meal for Padma, Tom, and Gail on Top Chef. We had gone to the Getty Museum, which was my first job when I was 17, first kitchen job when I was 17, and coming out of high school. And so to go back there now was also this whole other like circle of life type of experience, where it just kind of it went back to my roots and where it all started.
Being here in Italy, I really wanted to marry as much of Asian flavors and my own Chinese heritage with some of the ingredients here.
Melissa ha fatto un'interpretazione sua sulla nostra tradizione e sul suo cuore. Sono molto emozionato.
It made Dario cry. Tears, actual tears.
The big butcher was crying.
He really was moved by how beautifully you honored what his canon of food is.
Even my background living in San Gabriel Valley is like there's boba shops everywhere where there's Hong Kong milk tea, and then there's that like cheese foam, or they call it cheese foam, but it's basically mascarpone foam. And so I took the concept of that beverage and decided to kind of like hybrid it with this tiramisu, thinking, you know, there's coffee, why not make this with tea? It's like both are caffeinated, and this is like true to me and my culture. But like, let's try to like keep the technique of this very traditional Italian dish like the same, but like put a little twist to it. And so that's kind of how it all came to life.